buzzing through the walls, making their honey and singing their song. They say I worked for the queen all day. Yeah, I worked for the queen all day. Yeah.
Well, hello, the hive. I am back from Cape May, all the way from Cape May. Oh my gosh, and what a chapter to come back to. It's so good. Dead or Alive. Um, it's kind of, I was so thrilled to have a Willie chapter here. And I kind of love it. I knew it would be coming by the way the last one ended, if you recall. And I kind of love that we end the last chapter with Jamie praying, thinking of his son, remembering the time that he and Willie, where he came to him for help. How what a joy that was for him, even though it was such a tragic situation. And says a little prayer to Jean, and then says a prayer to his mother to watch out for his bonny lad. The very next chapter, we get this chapter that has, Willie really needing a guardian angel to look out for him. That's all I gotta say. He missed being killed again by the skin of his chinny chin chin, a couple of ways. So we're going to get into this chapter, chapter 7, Dead or Alive. So yes, so here we go. We're going to start with chapter 7, Dead or Alive. Um, like I said, it's our first Willie chapter, and like I said, the we knew from the way it ended that I was kind of thinking the way that Diana's pattern is. She kind of tends to, when she's switching gears after a few chapters in one area, and she's about to go to another main character, another point of view, she tends to do that. Like she'll talk a little bit about that character to kind of smooth so it doesn't feel as jolty, when you go over there. So we saw her do that. But I really love that he's asking his mother to watch over his bonny lad. And basically, like the next chapter, he's getting beat up, he's getting, captured, he's getting nearly hung, he's getting threatened, and just, all kinds of issues. He's around dangerous people, it might be dangerous. And so he's out there doing things and taking chances. So he definitely needs a guardian angel. And this was a heck of a chapter. Like, we didn't just come and like check in on Willie. Like we just jumped right into a mess for this guy. And so it's titled Dead or Alive. I kind of think that the title is referencing, how there's a lot of talk about dead or alive. There's a talk about whether Ben is dead or alive. There's talk about whether Willie was going to be hung or not, and he could have been dead or alive. We talk about the potential what could happen to John if anything came out about him. We talk about Bates being killed. And so there is a lot of talk about life and death. So, holy smokes, to come back to Willie in this chapter, and there's no like slow pastoral beginning here for Willie. Like, we have just spent 6 chapters, the first 6 chapters, were this pleasant, old home, feel the love, everybody reuniting, everything's just kind of joyful, and with a little touch of like ominousness, sprinkled all through, but it wasn't enough to overtake the joy of it. Was just kind of there simmering in the background. Here it's just up in your face. We jump right into conflict with Willie, and it kind of jolts, which I think the story needed it at this point, because it was starting to feel like it needed kind of a I mean, I enjoy all the reunion-y stuff and the recapping. Well, there's a lot of recapping in the beginning of this book too, which is a little bit much. It feels a little much, but I get why she has to do it. But it's like between the recapping and the kind of lack of, except for the bear attack, there hasn't really been anything to kind of be like to kind of like put you on your edge of your seat at all. And you want to have, you don't want to go too far into your book without something like that, something to kind of spark up a little bit of jeopardy or conflict. So this, I think, was happening in the right time, and you're kind of lulled into this pastoral vibe, and then all of a sudden this one kicks in, and you're like, whoa. It's like we were like going up the little hill, and now it's like, pew. But still, some stunning things happen in this chapter. Stunning things. Some of it was in a daily line, but not the big things weren't in a daily line. So this is one of those things where you got it, but you didn't get the big club you over the head things that were included in this chapter. We open up this chapter with William, 9th Earl of Ellesmere, Viscount Ashness, Baron Derwent, leaned against the oak tree, etc., taking stock of his resources. And so we open up with Willie leaning against this tree, and it's interesting that we open with all the names, just like we opened his first chapter in Moby, if you recall. And there was this big contrast too, from the beginning to the end. We kind of had the similar structured chapter for Willie, but it was like where it was all the names in the beginning. At the end, it was just William Ransom. But here, all the names are used. So I'm curious, like, what you think about that. And he's reckoning his assets. And we find out that he's been gambling with a bunch of other American militia that were at winter quarters in Middlebrook encampment, and which is where Ben was last seen. So Willie is still looking for Ben, and so he is seeking out the different people that he knew were there to try to see, and engage with them a little bit in some kind of like a friendly, relaxed situation to try to glean some information about Ben, because he's still on the lookout for Ben. And so, he had been gambling with a bunch of American militia that were there, and they all seemed very friendly the night before when they were gambling. He did very well, much like his father. He's a good card player, he's a good gambler. And while they all seemed friendly at first, they woke up with some gambler's remorse, and were now following him, and apparently planning to take their money back by force because they had convinced themselves that he must have cheated. We find out they have been at the Middlebrook encampment 6 months ago, and it was the last known place that Ben was seen. So Willie was trying to kill two birds with one stone while he was playing with them. He was playing with them, trying to win a little bit of money, trying to get up his resources while, because he's on the road doing all of this stuff. He can't just get money like that. So the only way he can get money is to win it, or to buy, to kind of get it on the road if it's not already on him. But at the same time, he's trying to get his information. So he wins. He got to know these men a little while he played. He wins, and we pick up with him hiding behind a tree, counting up his resources. And one of the things he had was a horse, and the horse had like a little missing chip in its shoe, which leaves a distinct mark. So if you have somebody that knows that horse and knows about that, they can follow that to track him. And he has some money, not a whole lot, but some stuff. He has a gun that's kind of crappy, that he thinks would explode in your face before it would actually do damage. But it was loaded, and he thought he would use it as a club if he actually had to use it, because he wouldn't trust it to try to fire it. And he has a knife. He starts to think, well, that whether Benjamin was still alive was a matter of considerable speculation, but he was going to proceed on the assumption that until he found proof to the contrary, he would go on the assumption Ben was still alive until he knew for sure he wasn't. He didn't get any information that, from these men about Ben. So as their drink ran low, they got wilder and wilder with their bets, and that's how he kind of pretty much left them skint. Um, he said, he was hoping he win enough to get supper and a bed for the night, which he did. But now he's thinking it's going to get him killed that he won all this, that he won all their money, because now a pack of the Americans had come by, were looking for him. He recognized some of the men, and so he's hiding behind this tree. He's trying to keep the horse quiet. They go by, and then he notes, kind of ominously, that it looks like it would be the right kind of tree for hanging someone. So we get this reminder of the hanging tree, which makes us remember Jane. It kind of reminds us a little of that, because that was kind of like this ominous thing that was there waiting for Jane. So the initial group, the bigger group that passed, they continue going. But now another group of 3 men were approaching. One of the 3 men was the guy that sold him the horse. The other 2 were from the militia unit that he was playing cards with. So the guy that sold him the horse and 2 militia, there was a nick, like I said, in the shoe that might make his tracks discoverable to the old owner. And so he takes off running, because he thought, that he could see they're going and looking at the tracks. He takes off running, and then the horse neighs and grabs the interest of the pursuers. So now he knows, like, he's seen. He grabs the reins, he swings up into the saddle, and they're all basically squatting in the road looking at a print, and William just turns around and runs right past them, going back toward the tavern, because he's figuring, okay, the other group just passed, they're still going that way, now this group is making their way that way. My best bet is to go back the way I came, because they're all going to be this way. I don't want to be stuck between them, which was a smart move. However, they all look and they gape at him. He could hear them shouting. He had a good lead. He thought he was going to make it. And they begin to look at, pursue. But what happened was the horse stumbles, slipped in the mud, went down. William went flying off over his head, landing flat on his back, and it knocks the wind out of him, which gives the pursuers a chance to catch up to him. So now they're on him, and they're beating him, and all of this stuff, and they're all pounding him, and they're trying to take the horse, and then the guy that owns the horse is yelling, saying, don't touch the horse. And so now, after they're punching him a little bit, punching him in the face, punching him around, they rifle his pockets, they take all his stuff, they take his knife, they take his gun. The men are trying to pull the saddle and the gear off of the horse, and the owner's yelling at them about it. They start to argue amongst themselves over who's going to get what, and he takes this distraction. He picks up the gun and he clubs the guy that the horse's ex-owner over the head with it. The horse is like shying because the man was half on, half off the horse, and William starts trying to fight his way out. But suddenly more horses come, and William dives, and he ends up landing on his face. He covers his head because now they're all on him. He has the original pack of people and these other pack of people, and he knows, like, I'm toast. I just gotta hope I survive this, So he just covers his head and like trying to protect his essential body parts. And all of a sudden he could feel the ground shaking around him, And then all of a sudden there's a bunch of fighting and people arguing and shots being fired, and he's like, what the hell's going on? Why are they fighting? But then all of a sudden he heard more horses, and he heard an organized rolling gunfire, and so he knows, like, that sounds like way British handle things. So he sits up and he sees that the forces of the crown have come up and they have rounded them up, all of the people, the militia people, placing them all under arrest. And just as Willie's like taking a chance to feel relieved about this, no such luck. He's placed under arrest as well. He tries to respond with entitled dignity. He tries to like play his Earl of Ellesmere card and tries to be like beyond these peon people that are talking to him. And so it says he scrambled to his feet and stared down at the much shorter private who took a step back, flushed red. Put your hands behind you. No. William said briefly and turned his back on the man and took a step toward the mounted officers. And so that guy seizes him. William says, "Take your hands off me." Then they threaten to shoot him. Willie realizes that the other guy is pointing his own musket at him, which he knows is dangerous. And then the first guy turns around, steps up behind him, and punches him solidly in the kidney. And he goes down. And now at this point, they all get arrested. But because William acted that way, they earmark him along with some others for hanging. So just as an example. So now we see William in a room. He's being guarded by two guards. He's managed to tear off his binding that they had binded his hands, and using it to dab his nose, which is bleeding. He's really mangled, very beat up, bloody nose, split lip, the whole shebang, and he gently blows his nose as he hears people coming up the stairs. So now, he says he's who? Said an annoyed voice outside the room. But someone said something in reply, but it was lost in the scraping of the door across the uneven floor as it opened. He rose slowly to his feet and drew himself up to his full height, facing the officer, a major of dragoons, who had just come in. The major stopped abruptly, forcing the two men behind him to stop as well. "He says he's the effing Earl of Ellesmere," William said in a hoarse, menacing tone, fixing the major with the eye that he could still open. And then we get this. "Actually, he is," said a lighter voice, sounding both amused and familiar. William blinked at the man who now stepped into the room, a slender, dark-haired figure in the uniform of a captain of infantry. Captain Lord Ellesmere, in fact. "Hello, William." "I've resigned my commission," William said flatly. "Hello, Dennis." So here he is, Dennis Randall, murky character number whatever he was. Okay, he comes into the scene. His immediate response is, "Well, yeah, but not your title." You know, and Randall looked up at him, up and down, but forbore to comment on his appearance. And so the guy, he's like, "Oh, is it to turn your coat and join the rebels?" And William is like trying to keep his cool, and he's breathing, trying to avoid any, saying anything too reckless. And he said no. And so now Denny steps in, and he starts to try to go to bat for William. And he's like, "And you were traveling with American militia. Why?" And he's like, I was not traveling with them." And I love it. It says, William said, successfully not adding "unit" to the statement. "I encountered the gentleman in question last night in the tavern and won a substantial amount from them at cards. I left the tavern early this morning and resumed my journey, but they followed me with the obvious intent of taking the money back by force." The other guy doesn't want to let it go, but you see Dennis Randall is trying to go to bat for him. And then Dennis says to him, "Sit down, Ellesmere, you're dripping on the floor. Did they in fact take the money out?" And he gives William a handkerchief. And William dabs the handkerchief against his lip, and it says he could smell Randall's cologne on it despite his swollen nose. The real eau de cologne, smelling of Italy and sandalwood. Lord John used it now and then, and the scent comforted him a little. So I love that Lord John's scent brought him comfort, that it was the same as John's, and it brought Willie comfort. So Dennis freaking Randall. Note that the non-response about the title, when he said, but it's not your title though, and William didn't say anything. But also note, why would he even ask about that if he doesn't know the truth? That kind of indicates there he knows more than he's saying right off the bat, because he said, why would he assume that just because he resigned his commission, he would resign his title, Um, he could be resigning his commission for a bunch of reasons, wouldn't have, because he was in the convention army, he didn't want to deal with that anymore. That's why, on the surface, why he resigned. So there's no link there to not your title, but he throws that out there. So that tells me he knows about the whole deal with that. And he does manage to appease the other officers by verifying that Willie is who he says he is. And we find out that his insistence on his title was what saved him from being hung. So his title and his cursing in Latin and his name dropping of people that he knows in the different, Clinton staff, and uses a lot of his clout. And they kind of thought, well, we best not take a chance with this, So they let him get off of having to get hung, which was very nice of them. Um, and so they want to know if he got any information from these men. And he replies that he just knows their name. But internally, he remembered very specific details, very Jamie like here, about the men and their families and where they're from, and about their children and their what they do for a living and everything. I mean, he could have given them an entire sheet of information on these people, and he chose to not do that. Why do you think he was protective of these men that just tried to beat and rob him? Let me know that. I'm kind of throwing out, I have quite a few discussion questions that I'm going to throw out to you on this chapter, which I don't normally do, but I'm curious to get your input because we finally have a chapter that has some meaty conflict and revealing of things and so forth. So I definitely want to get your feedback. So Randall says that William was on an intelligencing mission to gain information for a plan to kidnap George Washington, which is very interesting because that was an actual plan. We'll talk about that in a minute. And so through this whole encounter, you see William processing and quick thinking and observing all these little things, the noises and what they mean, and really kind of just taking in every little piece of information. And it was very Jamie like. You kind of see that natural ability to process a lot of different things from a lot of different sources on the fly. He has that natural ability as well. You saw it a lot in this chapter. He thinks a little bit of thanks toward Dennis Randall, but he's also a little bit suspicious. Like, why is he helping me? What is he trying to accomplish here? Like, he's not just being generous. It says, thank you, Dennis Randall, he thought and swallowed. He once thought of Dennis as a friend, and while he'd been disabused of that notion 3 years ago by Dennis's abrupt disappearance from Quebec, leaving William snowbound and without purpose, he hadn't quite thought the man would use him openly as a tool. But a tool for what purpose? Dennis seemed to have won his point. The major turned and gave William a narrow-eyed, assessing look, then shook his head, turned and left, followed by his reluctantly obedient lieutenant. Dennis stood quite still, listening to their footsteps recede down the stairs. Then he took a deep, visible breath, straightened his coat, and came and sat down opposite William. But before Dennis could speak, William said, "Isn't this a tavern? I'd like to get something to drink before you start telling me what the devil you just did to me." So he is grateful, but he's suspicious. Now, as they're drinking and they're getting themselves situated, William notices that there was a deep coating of dust that streaked Denny's wide cuffs and the grubbiness of his linen, and he deduces from that he'd been riding for days hard. He's been riding hard for days, and so he wondered whether Dennis's opportune appearance hadn't been entirely an accident, like he was there for a purpose. But if not, what and how? So I don't know what this means, like what his purpose was. Like, was it that his purpose was William? Because it doesn't sound like they had him in custody for days. Um, was it some other thing? I'm not really sure. The way it said it kind of makes it sound like there's something to that. So I guess I'll just kind of put a pin in it. And so Dennis sets down his mug and he's about to get to business. And what he asks about is murky character number two, Ezekiel Richardson. And he just basically comes right out and says, Ezekiel Richardson, when was the last time you saw him? And William is just kind of a little bit flabbergasted because that's the last thing he kind of expected to hear in this moment from him. So he tells him, maybe a year ago to actually speak to. He really, of course, he hates Richardson, so he didn't want to talk to him. And then he remembers it was Dennis that told him that Richardson deliberately sent him into the swamp um, to be abducted or killed by rebels in Dismaltown, and he nearly died in that swamp. So now, like hearing his name brought up, he's automatically more edgy. And so now Dennis tells him that he's deserted and he's turned his coat. And so you kind of get the impression this is the first that William is hearing this news. So I think that's kind of surprising to me because, he's talked to his father and his uncle since then, since that happened, and when they knew that he had turned his coat. So why hasn't anybody told William this? I'm kind of surprised about that. So then we get a little boo-boo, the first boo-boo. It says, Uncle Hal had, like most soldiers, thought intelligencing not a suitable activity for a gentleman, but Papa hadn't shown any reservations about it. It was also Papa who had introduced him to Dennis Randall. That's not true. That's a boo-boo. He actually was introduced to Dennis Randall by Ezekiel Richardson, and he's the one that told his father about Dennis Randall and to look into him. So that was a mistake. But then he says this. He spent some months with Randall Isaacs in Quebec, poking about to a little apparent end before Dennis had abruptly gone off on some undisclosed mission, leaving William with an Indian guide. Dennis was most certainly, for the first time, the absolute conviction that Dennis was a spy. And the notion that Papa himself might have been one floated into his head. By reflex, he thumped the heel of his hand against his temple in an effort to dislodge the idea, but it wouldn't go. So it says British had in the city of Savannah in late December. He'd been there himself soon after and had good cause to remember it, and his throat thickens thinking about Jean. So this sounds like, to me, that William senses that Dennis is a spy, but he doesn't know for who. And then he says he had a suspicion that his father was, and he didn't know that. It's not. He's actually trying to dislodge the thought out of his head and kind of throw it to the side because he doesn't really kind of want to give it credence. So he doesn't know. Apparently John's never told him that he worked for the Black Chamber or that he was involved in anything like that. So this is all news to William, but the thoughts in his mind. So now William asks, what, if anything, does Ezekiel Richardson have to do with my father? And Dennis just freezes on that. And he looks at him and he says, what makes you think he has anything to do with Lord John? William replies that Lord John knows Richardson. Richardson approached him with the notion that I should keep an eye out for interesting bits of information. And then he says, I see. So William can see Dennis is making calculations and decisions. He can see it flicker across his face. So then he says, and we get this, and I was just like floored. When I read this, I was floored, stunned, whatever you want to call it. I was like, what? He says, well, if they were friends, I should say that such a relationship no longer exists between them. Richardson was heard to utter threats regarding your father, though he has apparently not chosen to act on them. Yet, he added delicately. What sort of threats? William says. And he really kind of got angry and alarmed at it, because he doesn't want to think about, Richardson threatening his father in any way. Dennis tries to like act appreciative, and it's like, I'm sure they're, unfounded, you know. And William kind of starts to get mad. Tell me, or I'll pull your effing nose off. Dennis gets up and he says, I'll make allowances for your condition, Ellesmere. Um, but And William just kind of gives him a growl, and he said, all right. He said, Richardson threatened to make it known that Lord John is a sodomite. William blinked, frozen for a moment. The word didn't even make sense immediately. First of all, Dennis knows about this threat. So, how did he learn of this threat if he's not connected to Richardson? How does he know about this? How does he know that he's even made the threat of it? He's only really said this now to Claire. So, it must have been another time he said it. And so, are they working together? Richardson and Dennis. Um, Also, who else has Richardson told this to? At this point, we didn't know if Huey told. But now we know that at least Dennis Randall knows, Um, and William is flabbergasted. And I was flabbergasted that this is how William is finding this out. It felt almost uh, uh, like deflating, almost not deflating, but you kind of did not expect this to come out with such little drama attached to it. I guess I didn't expect him to find out in this manner, where he's just kind of chit chatting, with Randall, and he just says, oh, Richardson's threatening to let it be known that, Lord John's a sodomite. That really kind of surprised me. So now William is just like, oh my God, he's like flabbergasted. He's calling it rubbish, and he's like, he was married. And interestingly, Dennis knows about Claire and Jamie and the circumstances of John's marriage to Claire. He calls John's marriage to Claire the merry widow of a Scotch rebel general. So we can already see how that's going to be twisted, in their campaign against John. That they're not going to, it's not going to be like favorably looked at, like, well, he was married to this woman, as a way of an excuse. It's almost like going to be a detraction, because they're making it out that she was the merry widow of a Scotch rebel general, which automatically kind of puts a taint on that. Willie brings up Isabel, and he says something to the fact, Richardson can't hurt us with this nonsense. He was married for years to my stepmother, and he says, this is all just rumor and nonsense, and then Dennis says, rumor and reputation can ruin many men, and illustrates this with an example of his own reputation and how it helped get William out of trouble. But if he had a bad reputation, they wouldn't have taken his word for anything about William. So Dennis tells him, he considers the whole thing. He says, oh, he who steals my purse steals trash, sort of thing. And Dennis replies, but he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which it not enriches him, makes him poor indeed. Yes, that sort of thing. Consider what gossip of the sort Zeke Richardson has in mind could do to your family, will you? And so William starts to think about the impact of this. So Dennis tells him that Richardson plans to destroy his family name. Now, I don't really know what this means about Randall. Is this a good cop, bad cop thing? A way to start laying a foundation through acting like he's doing him a favor, but he's really not? Or is Randall really on William's side, on the Gray's side? Is he really on the American side? What's his story? And also, while William on the surface thinks the whole thing's BS, the seed is planted, And now when he talks to him and looks at him, that's in the back of his mind. He'll be looking for little things that kind of seem different or off, maybe. That's what I kind of imagine. William says, I see what you're saying. He said gruffly. And now Dennis brings up Major Bates. Now we know the whole story with Bates from Brotherhood of the Blade. Diana's really, she really, I can see why she kept telling people to read the Lord John series while they're waiting for bees, because like you can see Diana is going between John Cinnamon and Minogue, and now this, bringing up Bates, bringing up Percy. I can see why it's going to be important for people to kind of have a little bit of familiarity with the characters and the things that happened in the Lord John series. So I'm glad we did what we did. And so he says, he tells him how his father chose to be present at the hanging of this man that was convicted of sodomy and hanged. And he says he clung to the major's legs to hasten his death. And he says, I don't suppose he would have mentioned that incident to you, though. And William kind of shakes his head. And then Randall says, there is death of the soul as well as death of the body. See, there's the life and death. Even if he were not arrested nor tried and convicted, a man so accused might well lose his life as it presently exists. So he brings up Bates and John's role in helping to quicken his death in the hanging, which is pretty detailed information for Dennis to know. And then he says, I guess Lord John never told you about that, which of course is meant to make Willie feel like, what else hasn't Lord John told you about? Now, like, William is ticking these things off. Well, I think that he was a spy. He never told me about that. Now, this happened with this Major Bates with Simon. I've never heard this story, and all of these like little things. And now, so maybe he doesn't know his father as well as he thinks he does. It's putting these little seeds of doubt. And then there's this next bit where he says, a man so accused might well lose his life as it presently exists. And then he's just talking about Lord John, either as a threat or a warning, but it also applies a little bit to William's own situation right now with his parentage, that he might well lose his present social status and position and reputation if it becomes known what his story is, what his background is. He doesn't say that, but it's something that would apply in William's own mind to his own situation. Dennis asks him what made him resign his commission to begin with. William says, none of his business. And then he wants to know, well, what were you doing here? And so he thought to say none of his business again, but then he thought, well, Dennis seems to know about a lot of crap. Maybe he knows about Ben. So he mentions that he's looking for Ben, his cousin, Benjamin, Captain Benjamin Gray of the 34th Foot. He asks him if he knows him by chance. It says Dennis blinked, blank-faced, and Williams felt a small, surprising jolt in the pit of his stomach, the same feeling he got when a fish nibbled his bait. So, it seems that he knows things about Ben by his facial expression that William picked up that he's not saying. Randall says, I've met him. Okay. And he asks, what do you mean you're looking for him for a trace of him? Is he lost? And he says, he was being, he was taken prisoner, but he was being kept in Middlebrook encampment in the Watchung Mountains. My uncle got a letter from Sir Henry Clinton's clerk saying from the Americans regretting the death of Captain Benjamin Gray from fever. And now that makes Dennis relax a little bit. And he kind of still watchful, and he says, my condolences. You mean that you want to find where your cousin's buried to move the body, And William said, yeah, I had that in mind, only I did find his grave and he wasn't in it. If you can tell, like, he was relieved when the issue was that he was dead, because it almost seems like he knew about that story. This is what it seems like to me. It seems like he knows about that whole situation. He knows that he's supposed to be, like, thought up to be dead. And so then he was worried that wasn't somehow happening the way it was supposed to. And then when William said, um, yeah, but, I went and I looked for his grave and he wasn't there, you know, um, or when he said that he did die and he was in the grave, Randall looks relieved, that he finds out that he's dead. He looks relieved. Like, why is he relieved about that? He's relieved that the story is sticking, in my opinion. And William says that, he went to dig up his grave, he wasn't there, but someone else was there, a thief. Randall's like, dear me, like, wow, that's something. He says, you're sure about that? I mean, maybe, he was just decomposed enough and everything. He's like, no. He said he had no ears. And so Dennis looked a little shocked. And he says, well, maybe you just had the wrong grave. No, it was marked as gray. And Randall then concurs with William's suspicions. And William feels relieved that, okay, somebody else is reading these things the same way. He says, so then it's one of two possibilities, William says. Ben either faked his death and managed to substitute another body in order to escape without pursuit, or somebody did it for him without his consent and took him away. He said, I can see the first possibility, but damned if I can think of a reason for the second possibility. He says, but it doesn't matter that much. If he's alive, I can find him, and I bloody will find him. The family has to know. He said it was also true that Ben's disappearance had offered him a purpose, a way out of the morass of guilt and sorrow left by Jean's death. So William has come to these two alternatives. Either Ben faked his own death and put this body in there so that he could facilitate an escape, or he or someone else did it, made it look like he was dead, and then is keeping him prisoner. I'm kind of worried that he's telling Randall a little too much information here, but we'll see how that goes. And then he says, well, I wish you good luck. And he says, well, I have a list. And he touches his pocket. And he says, of the men belonging to Middlebrook encampment that had grave detail during the fever outbreak. He says, oh, so that's what you were doing with these men. So we find out that William has this list of men who were on grave duty at the time that he has been tracking them down to glean information. William asks him about, what's the story about me, what was this nonsense you said about me planning to kidnap George Washington? And Randall laughs and says, and William is getting upset. He says, well, not you personally. It's just a ruse de guerre. It worked though, didn't it? And I had to think of some explanation for your appearance. And he said, being an intelligencer was the only halfway believable thing I could think of. Interestingly enough, a plan was hatched around this time to do just that. And I've attached a link to the article in the description of this live. And so I kind of wonder, because this plan was hatched close to around this time. And so I kind of wonder if Denny's knew about that plan and was setting word in process by telling people this, that William was involved so he would be incriminated, or was it just a coincidence that an actual plan was happening? I really kind of find that hard to believe, but we'll see what you guys think about that. So now they make a bargain, and they make this bargain that Randall will tell William any news he hears of Ben, and William will share any word he has from Ezekiel Richardson with him. He asks William where he's headed next. William says Virginia. So we know as the reader where we're going to see him next. And Randall gives him back his horse and weapons, and he gives him money out of his own pocket, 2 guineas. So what do you make? Here's my final questions to you guys. What do you make of Randall at this point? Do you think he's good? He's bad? He's for William, against William? Is he really with the Americans? Is he playing some other kind of game? What do you think? Second question, does Denny's know that it's true about Lord John? Does he just know about what Richardson is implying, or does he know that it's actually true? And if so, how does he know? I mean, I would guess that he knows if he knows all this other stuff. What are your thoughts on Dennis? And are we being lulled into this false sense of security, or is he the good guy that he seems? Were you shocked that William was told that Lord John Grey was a sodomite in this very first chapter? And that, and even though William said that it's nonsense, this seed has been planted. So will he know for sure by the end of the book, do you think? Do you think that it will be where he knows without doubt of what John is? And if so, how do you think he's going to find that out? Now, again, if you've read ahead um, and you know the answers to these questions, please don't answer these questions in the comments directly about what I'm asking. I mean, you can comment, but don't comment in any way that reflects knowledge of these things. But for those of you that are reading with me, and thank you, I appreciate your patience. While I was on this trip away, it was really impossible. Didn't have the best Wi-Fi, and it was just impossible to be able to do this. I tried. Did make a few notes in my thing to be able to share, but other than that, I couldn't do it. So anyway, that's the end of this first take on chapter 7. Let me know your thoughts on this chapter. I thought it was great. It had finally some excitement, some conflict, some shocking things that were revealed. Things I felt like I didn't already know. This is like the first time I'm really getting information that I didn't already know. That, like, I knew it myself that Lord John's a sodomite, but I didn't know that was going to be revealed to William in this situation. So I really, that was really a great chapter. So let me know your thoughts on it, and I will be back soon with chapter 8. All right, bye.